So there are numerous tools on the market to conduct a penetration test. However, achieving success in a test largely depends on the right set of tools and the techniques that are used. In order to complete a test, you've got to choose the right set of tools and apply the best methodologies. Sure, it would be a whole lot easier and a whole lot of time savings if just one single tool could help you perform all the required tasks for penetration testing. That's why when I think of the best tools for penetration testing, Metasploit framework is the one that first comes to mind. In the security marketplace, it's considered to be the most effective tool to conduct a penetration test today. It can literally perform all tasks that are involved in a penetration testing lifecycle. Now, it's important to understand the capabilities of Metasploit so that it can be leveraged perfectly during each test. With the use of Metasploit, you really don't need to reinvent the wheel. It offers a wide variety of exploits, information gathering modules, with a few web testing capabilities too. So Metasploit allows you to easily build attack vectors to augment its exploits, payloads, encoders, and way more in order to create and execute more advanced attacks. So besides manually or automatically accomplishing these tests, Metasploit is not just an application. Like I said before, it's an entire framework that has an extensive exploit development environment. And what that means is it allows you to customize and extend the framework for whatever your requirements may be. So no doubt you've seen that it's a very powerful tool for penetration testing. However, I want to warn you, it's not a magic tool that can help you hack into any target system. One of the goals of this course is to get you comfortable with the framework, show you some advanced attacks, and ensure that you can apply these techniques responsibly. Right? So in the next few hours, you will be talking about the Metasploit framework. Now, before we jump into the hacking, you should know why I prefer Metasploit among all the other tools out there. Thankfully, first up, it's an open source project. So, yeah, this is pretty much my main reason why I go with Metasploit. It's also actively developed. Metasploit allows you to reach the source code and customize the modules. And yeah, it has a chargeable version, but I will give you details about all the different versions in the next section. I also think it's easy to use Metasploit. It has reasonable naming conventions and commands. And it's great for testing large networks because you don't get confused and you don't have to dread a whole lot of extra busy work. Because Metasploit offers to test the entire range automatically. It uses parameters such as subnet and classless interdomain routing, CIDR values. So therefore, Metasploit saves a large amount of time and energy. Now, Metasploit has a variety of payloads, and you can easily switch between them. For automated exploits, you can create and set payloads quickly. Moreover, generating shell code to use in manual exploits also becomes easy by using the MSF Venom from the command line. Metasploit also offers cleaner exits. In other words, when you try to compromise a system by using a custom-coded exploit, you've got to be really careful. Because if the exploit does not have a right exit code, that has the big potential to crash the system. And believe me, that's not a good practice at all. So if you don't want to face such situations and the wrath that it brings upon you, Metasploit is also responsible for making a much cleaner exit from the system that you want to get into. and luckily the graphical user interface. Yeah, the commercial and the community version of Metasploit has GUI, and you can perform most anything from there. So this brings up the question, what do you have for Metasploit framework? The answer is Armitage, which is a third-party interface. Hopefully you're going to be learning these environments more in the later sections. So stick with me. So over the last decade or so, technology development has dramatically increased, which can easily be observed when you have a look at what's in your pocket. I'm talking about your cell phone. So therefore, a new form of technology pops up and it finds application fields in the market. Bitcoin, cloud, IoT, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and machine learning applications, and so on. Also, now programming languages and frameworks are far more powerful and versatile. So I'm hoping that therefore this evolution will never end. Gives me something to do anyway. Moreover, private and governmental organizations are in such a competition for applying these improvements. Almost all the businesses move partially or completely to IT. They create new web applications, buy new hardware, and set up new data warehouses. Almost everything is automated. And even you are part of this system. So while these technologies completely change the way you do things, they also bring along some threats with them. And these threats, they will come into your life. And then the organizations that you perhaps work for, they will overreact or apply too much effort for detection and the protection of their system. They are so deeply concerned about keeping their data safe, they'll invest millions and millions of dollars in security programs to prevent possible data breaches. Then attackers can discover new ways of manipulating technology, and then the security programs develop new ways to prevent data breaches, and it goes on and on. While defensive security measures can fail, testing the system against the adversaries gains much more importance. So penetration testing is the best solution for organizations to accomplish these scenarios. I mean, testing is not the only way to protect the system. However, it is one of the most effective ways to identify the weaknesses in the systems, right? So by attempting to circumvent security controls, penetration testing can identify the ways in which a hacker might be able to do so. The organization will get the idea of how an attacker can gain access to their system and how they can then stop that attacker to be effective. And then, of course, that way they can easily identify the negative and positive aspects of their security system. So for all these reasons, and probably more than I can think of, and you could probably come up with a whole bunch more, but you can see that all compliance and auditing firms include penetration testing in their operations. So, with penetration testing, an organization can easily evaluate its security posture. All right, so penetration testing execution standard. It's a specification document which is redefining the penetration test for both new and experienced penetration testers. It has been adopted by several leading members of the security community. So therefore, if you feel you are new to penetration testing standards or uncomfortable with the terms, please have a look at it. The penetration testing execution standard, I believe, will be the best one for you to go from. Now, I know that last sentence sounds like an advertisement, but you're not going to lose anything if you check some of these documents once, okay? So PTES is divided into 7 phases. Let's have a look at each of them briefly. Pre-interactions. So the pre-interactions, typically, that's the phase that you discuss the scope and the terms of the penetration test and convey your goals of the engagement with your client. While discussing the scope of the penetration test, you should clarify all the domains that will be tested, as well as any special requirements that are going to be needed, such as special privileges and the access to the critical systems and so on and so forth. See, that's why you're going to develop your own way of keeping track of it all. The expected positives of the test should also be part of the discussion with the client in this phase. Great, so now this is what you should do before testing begins. Intelligence gathering. The information or intelligence gathering phase, or reconnaissance, as I talked about earlier, it's one of the most important phases in penetration testing. If you are properly gaining knowledge about your target from social networks, Google, or any other way that you can accomplish, you're going to be able to simulate appropriate and exact attacks rather than trying all possible attack vectors. This will also help you save a huge amount of time as well. So I believe anyway, it's a duty of a penetration tester to gather enough information about the target by performing a variety of scans. So that includes looking for open ports, identifying services running on those ports, and you're also going to be able to discover what vulnerable services exist. I find this phase particularly important. So, in the Metasploit framework, there are many auxiliary modules that enable you to gather information from the target. Now, the next phase is threat modeling. So this phase focuses on categorization and modeling of the threats based on their impacts on the system. Now, in my point of view, this phase is not necessarily always applicable. It depends upon how much time you have. If you are performing a long-term red team activity, modeling threats are going to work for you. But on the other hand, in an ordinary situation, you probably don't have the time to model a threat. You're going to look rapidly for a way to exploit and gain access to the system. So our next phase will be vulnerability analysis. Now, in this phase, you analyze the target network and make a vulnerability scan over that network to identify all of the weaknesses. Once again, this is a very important phase. It's also what I would call a stepping stone into the exploitation phase. So the next phase is exploitation. Either manually or automatically, you will detect vulnerabilities for this network. In this phase, you'll identify which vulnerability is applicable, if possible, and then you run the appropriate exploit for this particular vulnerability. Now, being successful in this phase means that you have access to the system. Now, believe me, you will be satisfied. And now it's time to gather some extra information. So this next phase is called post-exploitation. After gaining access to the target, you will look for some extra information and use some advanced ways to maintain your access. Now this phase, if you haven't ever done it before, this is going to be really mind-blowing for you. And then our last phase is reporting. So you've done a whole mess of things, okay? So you've exploited the target, maintained your access, and all kinds of things. Now, to a client, this might not even seem like much. You might not even have been detected by the client. So you have to report on what you have done on the system in a proper way. So it's important for this to make absolute clear sense. And otherwise, clients, they're pretty much going to wonder what you actually do. So it's important that you practice what you've learned while the course develops. And for that reason, you should build your own lab. Mwahaha. So don't worry, I'm going to help you build it step by step. This is going to be your own lab, so you can customize it the way you want. But I will teach you each step one at a time. So before you even jump to any conclusion, all the lab environments will cost you zip, nada, nothing. only your time and perhaps patience. So first, let's have a look at the requirements. When you prepare your lab, you should make sure that your setup will meet the basic system requirements. Because we'll be using virtual machines and some pretty processor-intensive tools, I highly recommend that your system should be capable of handling at least 2 virtual machines at the same time. So for storage, I don't want to give you, just any random numbers about the size of available hard drive space, but you really will need it. If you don't have enough, you're probably going to face some problems. Now for memory, insufficient memory fails suck, so I strongly advise using at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. For your processor, I think if you're on this course, it means that you've probably got a good enough processor to support virtualization. Now, you should activate it from BIOS if this is the first time for you to actually start up with a virtual machine. And what about for hypervisor? VMware Player, VMware Workstation, or VirtualBox? All of them are going to be good options to build this lab on. You're going to watch me using VirtualBox because, well, some intentionally vulnerable virtual machines only work on VirtualBox, so I would highly recommend you do that too. And finally, we'll talk about your internet access. You are going to need internet, but only when you're setting up the lab. Otherwise, I don't think you're going to need it. You can do it offline, but it'll be good to search for extra information. So basically, the lab network will be all that. You'll be using VirtualBox in net network mode as hypervisor. Then you will download and configure the virtual machines together. So let's get started first with VirtualBox. So now let's provide connectivity between your virtual machines. So the way I'm going to do this, I will include all of my virtual machines in a NAT network. I'm first going to start with Kali. So I'll choose it, click Settings, go to Network Settings, change NAT to NAT Network, right? And click OK. Now do the same thing for the other virtual machines quickly. So snapshots. I strongly advise you to take a snapshot of each machine in your lab, because you're going to, do some hacking stuff on each of the machines. They're going to contain many payloads and exploits on them. You may crash them or trash them or do whatever the heck you can to them. So take snapshots so you don't have to create and import the machines from the very beginning. You can go to the Snapshots menu from here, or from the above menu, go to Machine Tools, Snapshots, and you'll see this pane here. So choose your virtual machine and click this green plus sign, and then give a name and write a definition about your snapshot. So I'm just going to leave it the same and just write the definition as clear to define it as a clear installation. You can write whatever you want about yours. Click OK. And now I'll just quickly take the other snapshots. Yeah, so there it is. I finished taking snapshots. So finally, we finished building the lab. So let's get hacking. So here we are. Meet the Metasploit framework. This is pretty much your Swiss Army knife to pen testing. Until now, you might recall the basic phases of a penetration tester and completed the lab setup. So let's talk about the big picture. Metasploit framework. I consider the MSF to be one of the most useful penetration testing tools freely available. The Metasploit framework provides an impressive workspace that is, well, beyond any others that I can think of, because it's beyond any one particular tool that has a bunch of exploits. So it's more than that, though. You can customize it for your own purpose. From a wide variety of commercial exploits, as well as an extensive exploit development environment, all the way to network information gathering tools and web vulnerability plugins, you can pretty much find almost everything that you need for a penetration test. But to be clear about this course is I have prepared this in a manner to encompass only the front end or the user aspects of the framework, pretty much with the aim to give an in-depth look into the many features of Metasploit. So this isn't an exploit development course for MSF. I'll plan that for later, and you'll be raring to go. But it is an amazing tool for sure. So before we do a little walk around, let's have a little brief talk about its history. And believe me, I'll be brief. Won't be too long. So the creator of Metasploit is H.D. Moore, who was spending most of his time validating and sanitizing public exploit codes to use in 2003. Then the idea of a framework formed in his mind, and the first edition came out. The first edition was a complete Perl project released in 2003 with a total of 11 exploits. Then, with the help of some other friends, Metasploit 2.0 was released in 2004 with 19 exploits and over 27 payloads. Then shortly after this release, the team continued to widen and Metasploit gained popularity in the information security community. Then following a complete rewrite in the Ruby programming language, the Metasploit team released Metasploit 3.0 in 2007. 150,000 lines of code added to the project in an 18-month period after migrating from Ruby. With the 3.0 release, Metasploit saw widespread adoption in the security community and also a big increase in user contributions. In the fall of 2009, Metasploit was acquired by Rapid7, which allowed HD to build a team to focus only on the development of the Metasploit framework. After the acquisition, updates have occurred more, rapidly. Then Rapid7 released 2 commercial products based on the Metasploit framework, Metasploit Express and Metasploit Pro. Metasploit Express was a lighter version of the Metasploit Pro. But for this version, Rapid7 announced the end of life on June 4th, 2018. So the team will focus on Metasploit Pro by adding new features such as collaboration, group penetration testing, and so much more. So I told you I'd be brief. This was your history class of the Metasploit project. So like it or not, basically the life cycle of a product pretty much defines what it is. So being familiar with the file system of a tool might help you to exploit it a little bit better. So take some time to make yourself familiar with its file system. In order to do that, the best way to learn the structure of Metasploit is to browse through its directory. Metasploit framework is provided in the User Share Metasploit Framework directory in Kali Linux, and one can more easily understand the Metasploit architecture by having a look under its hood. So let's examine the file system of Metasploit and see just how the framework is constructed. So I'm going to open a terminal, and let's have a look, see where we are. So I'm going to Metasploit Framework directory. And when using Kali Linux, the Metasploit framework is usually located in the path User Share Metasploit Framework. So let's see what we have here. Right, so hopefully if you can see over my shoulder here, the MSF file system is organized by really well-defined directories. And the structure is very clear. The Metasploit framework has a variety of component categories based on their role in the penetration testing phases. For example, here, the data folder. This directory stores editable files, such as word lists and binaries, required for some of the exploits. So let me show you some of the word list directories. Metasploit uses these lists for brute force. The documentation folder. As its name suggests, the documentation directory contains the available documentation for the framework. Modules folder. All the Metasploit modules are contained in this directory. Now, the modules directory is where you will find the actual MSF modules for exploits, auxiliaries, post modules, payloads, encoders, and NLP generators, and you will be interacting with Metasploit mostly by modules. The primary directory for modules is user, share, Metasploit framework, modules. But you can use your own modules from your home directory at MSF4 modules. Plugins folder. And as I said before, Metasploit is not a rigid tool. You can customize it and add plugins to increase its power. So you're going to find these plugins in this directory. Some of the common plugins are OpenVAS, Nexpose, Nessus, and a variety of others which can be loaded into the framework using the load command. Scripts. The scripts directory contains Meterpreter and other scripts. Now I'm going to show you some of the Meterpreter scripts. These scripts help you to automate some of the post-exploitation jobs, such as keyboard recording, dumping password hashes, and getting much more information from the compromised system. Tools. The tools directory has various useful command line utilities that aid in penetration testing, and that's contained in this folder. I also want to show you how to view the Metasploit directory from the GUI. Now, this will be way more helpful to get a better understanding of the framework and all of its components. So from folder view, user, share, Metasploit framework, and now you're in the Metasploit directory. You can open the folders that you have viewed from the terminal. So you've learned so far that Metasploit is a complete penetration testing framework, and it's not just a single tool. When you call it a framework, it obviously means that it consists of many useful tools and utilities. So I've shown you basically an overview of the Metasploit file system. Metasploit consists of various components such as libraries, modules, plugins, and tools. So here I have a diagrammatic view of the structure of Metasploit for you. Let's have a look to understand the use of the various libraries as explained in the diagram. Rex handles almost all core functions such as setting up sockets, connections, formatting, and all the other raw functions. MSF Core provides the basic API and the actual core that describes the framework. MSF Base provides some friendly API support to the modules. So if you're not developing exploits or some of the other modules, you will mostly deal with prepared penetration modules showed here in the red rectangle in the diagram. So you have the option to load modules either at runtime or from the MSF console. To load modules at runtime, from the terminal, pass the M option when running MSF console. But you can also load your modules from MSF console by using the load path command. Now let's have a look at this colorful diagram. It's a broad-level structure of Metasploit framework. You're going to be using auxiliary modules to carry out operations such as information gathering, fingerprinting, logging into various services, and so on. These modules are particular to enumeration. For example, you might want to perform a version detection on an FTP service to model an attack. Such tasks can be very easily accomplished using auxiliary modules present in the Metasploit framework. As I created this course, there are over 1,000 auxiliary modules spread across 19 categories in the Metasploit framework. This screenshot shows various categories of the auxiliary modules present in the Metasploit framework. Now, I'm just giving you an idea of how deep it is. I don't need you to get overwhelmed by the number of auxiliary modules present in the Metasploit framework. So you don't need to know each module. You only need to know how to find the appropriate one. All you do is search the right module in the required context and use it accordingly. You're going to cover extensive usage of examples of auxiliary modules in some of the later sections of this course. But since you asked, let me quickly show you one. So I'm going to make a TCP port scan on Metasploitable 2. But first, look at the path of the auxiliary TCP port scan module. All right, so it's here, as you see in the path. So let me bring the Metasploit 2 to the record screen. It's on my second screen. Okay, so look at the IP address, 10.10.2.14. So I'm going to make a port scan on this IP. Open your terminal with me. And before I start Metasploit, it's better to start PostgreSQL. I'll talk about databases after you're familiar with the environment. So I'll initialize the Metasploit databases with msfdb init command. Then type msf console q to start Metasploit in quiet mode. Okay, so finally it's open. Now the basic syntax of usage is like this. Type use, and then the name of the module that you want to use. In this case, auxiliary scanner port scan. Now here I'll press tab. As you can see here, Metasploit has a magnificent tab completion. So now I can type the rest. And to show the variables of the module type, show options. You see the variable names make sense. Ports, rhosts. You can set a variable like this. Set rhosts 10.10.2.14. Same for ports variable. Set ports between 20 and 500. Then run the module. So it'll take a few minutes to scan for the ports between 20 and 500. And there, it's finished. So as you can see, these TCP ports are open on Metasploit 2. And this is pretty much the basic usage of an auxiliary module. So let's go ahead and meet some of the other types of modules. A payload is a piece of code that executes on the target system, and it helps us carry out some of the operations, such as connect to the command line of the target after a successful exploitation. To basically understand what a payload does, let's consider a real-world example. So I want to show you an example that I heard of before, which helps me understand it as well. Payloads are kind of an explosive material that's in the head of a missile. When the missile hits the target, the explosive material causes the damage desired by the owner. Now, the owner of the missile can change the explosive material as well as the payloads. So that's the way that the Metasploit framework works with payloads. It allows you to perform some operations on the target system. For example, a reverse shell is a payload that creates a connection from the target machine back to you as a Windows command prompt, whereas a bind shell is a payload that binds a command prompt to a listening port on the target machine, which you can then connect to. This screenshot shows various categories of payload modules present in the Metasploit framework. So I'm going to go to the Metasploit directory to view payloads. I'm using GUI to be clearer. And here, under the payload folder, you're going to see three different kinds of folders named singles, stagers, and stages. These are the main payload types. Singles are the payloads that consist of the exploit and require shellcode, which means they have everything that is required to exploit the vulnerability on the target. Naturally, the size of these payloads is pretty big. Thus, it's not going to be good for if you want to be stealthy. So, for example, this one, Meterpreter Reverse TCP. And stagers. Just so you know, sometimes size really matters. Okay, the stagers payload comes in handy in such a situation. So they don't have the exploit code. That means they're going to be smaller in size, and it's going to help you in many other tests. Like this one, bind TCP and reverse TCP. And then finally, stages. After the stagers communicate with the target system, stages are then uploaded to the target system to do the actual actions desired by the penetration tester or attacker. And here you see the Meterpreter payload, which is the most used stages payload. And you'll use it in many exploits, but we're going to get to that in some of the later sections. All right, so that's enough theory, don't you think? So open up your terminal again. And just like before, you can use an auxiliary module. Usage is the same. Use, and then the payload name. Use payload, Windows, Meterpreter, bind TCP. Now, let me tell you an important point here. Bind TCP payloads make the attacking machine directly connect to the target. So, when you show the options of this module, there will be rhost and lport variables. Rhost defines the address of the target machine. Now, in this case, it is the IP address of Metasploitable 2. And lport is the port number on the attacking machine that the attacking machine will listen on. And then on the other hand, there is reverse TCP connections. So I'll show you both ways. Use payload, Windows, Meterpreter, reverse TCP. When you show the options, you will see the lhost and lport variables. So in this case, lhost is the IP address of the callie that the target will connect back to. And lport is the port number on the callie that will listen for incoming connections from the target. So I'm going to set lhost as my IP address. Let me check my address on a new tab. Just want to be sure. Okay, 10.10.2.11 is my IP. And I'll set L port to 4445. Then you can use run or generate as the command to generate the shell code of this payload. So this is the payload, and by scrolling down you can view just how long it is. But see, now you can use it as an exploit code. But you're not going to work that way in this course. I'll tell you why coming up. So exploits are the most important part of the Metasploit framework. They make you take advantage of a flaw within any particular system, an application, or a service. So it's by using exploits that you, or maybe an attacker, can get the results from that the developer or the system administrator would never intend for. In Metasploit framework, there are 1,824 exploits when I recorded this course, which includes more than 15 categories based on the different platforms. And right up here are the various categories of the exploits. Now, I guess you might think about how you're going to find your way among all of the available exploits. So let me quickly show you one. Now, first, I got to mention you've got to be very careful before using any of these exploits. So let me suggest to you that you make an extensive enumeration on the target that you want to use an exploit on. A proper enumeration of a target might give the operating system of the target, including the exact version and architecture, open ports on the target, both TCP or UDP, services with the version information, and probability of a particular service being vulnerable. So first, let's have a look at the exploit modules from the GUI. Look into the folder, and here there are over 15 categories. And under each one, you'll find even more categories. Under Unix, FTP, here's the exploit that I want to use. So we'll go back to the terminal. Now I want to clear the screen. Usage is the same as auxiliaries. Use, and the name of the exploit. Use exploit Unix, FTP, vsftpd backdoor. So I'll use this one just as an example. Then show you the options of the exploit. Set rhost to your Metasploitable2 IP address. Default port number is 21. So you don't need to change it unless you find that this version of FTP is running on another port. And I'll show you the options again. Okay, so here you go. Type exploit to run the exploit code against the Metasploitable2. And ta-da, you have your first shell on the target. As you can see here, Metasploit warns us about the open shell. So this is not an interactive shell. And while you can type some Linux commands directly here, who am I using the shell? Ooh, root user. Type ID to see the actual user. And yeah, sure enough, it's correct. So you can write here Linux commands. For example, ifconfig. And you see that? This is Metasploitable2. Now, when you create payloads directly, most of the time these payloads are detected by security tools on the targeted systems. So at this point, you will need something tricky to evade their security tools. And as you can guess, encoders come to the rescue. Now, the job of the encoders is to obfuscate your payload in such a way that it goes undetected by any of the security systems on the target system. So have a look at the table on the screen, and it shows the various encoder categories available in the Metasploit framework. So clear the screen and minimize it, and I'll show you the encoders folder from the GUI. So it's under the modules directory you'll find the encoders folder, and that contains 10 different categories. And I will use this one under x86. So now let's turn back to the command line. To view the encoders from Metasploit, type show encoders. All the encoders will be listed just like that. Now you are allowed to encode each payload directly in Metasploit by typing set encoder and then the encoder schema name. But mostly you will use encoders with MSF Venom tool separately. So I'll do that in this tab. Open a new tab. Now, let's not get confused about MSF Venom. I'll tell you about it later in a separate section. Just wanted to show you what the deal is. So now, let's just focus on the E parameter. With this parameter, you will define the encoding schema for your payload. So let me complete this example. By hitting enter, an exe file which contains an encoded payload will be generated. And then look here, it's the root directory, and you'll see the file. And as you can see, this is a Windows executable file. Now the post modules contain various scripts and utilities that help you to further infiltrate your target system after a successful exploitation. Once you successfully exploit a vulnerability and get into your target system, the post-exploitation modules are going to help you in the following ways. Escalate user privileges, dump OS credentials, steal cookies and saved passwords, get key logs from the target system, execute PowerShell scripts, and make your access persistent. The Metasploit framework has more than 250 such post-exploitation utilities and scripts. So after gaining a shell, you can choose the appropriate post module to gather more information from the target or escalate your privileges. So let's see what a post modules directory looks like. Under modules, post, and there are the post module directories. So because I have exploited a Linux system, I'll need to use Linux post-exploitation modules. So let's go have a look at the Linux folder. And under Linux, there's a gather folder. And what do you have here? The hash dump module. Now it's not only for Linux. If you look over here, you have the same for Windows as well. Now, before we go jumping into the command line, I just want you to realize just how meaningful the Metasploit directory structure really is. Now, you might ask, can you find your way around only by examining the structure? Let's go back to terminal. So now I'm going to use the VSFTP exploit again. So use exploit Unix FTP, VSFTPD, show options. Everything is ready to exploit. Then exploit J. So this command will exploit the target, and if I get a session, then it will hold that session in the background. Type sessions to list the available sessions in the background. And there it is. It's session 4. So now is the time to use a post module over this session. Now the usage syntax of a post module is the same. Type use, and then the name of the post module. Use post, Linux, gather, hash dump. Now show the options to me. Only the session variable. So set this variable to the index of the session 4. Then exploit. Ha 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 ha. So here are the password hashes of Metasploitable 2 users. Now, you don't have to stay with that. You can also use some of the other post modules. Metasploit comes in various editions. And now that there are 3 options, the Express edition isn't used any longer. The first one is a commercial edition, Metasploit Pro. So this edition offers tons of great features. It allows you to scan web applications, evade antiviruses, as well as automate exploitation. The Pro version is generally used for advanced penetration testing and included in organization security programs. So let's see what the next flavor is. Metasploit Community. So this is a free edition. It might fit for students and small businesses who want to deal with security. Now, naturally, the edition is not as capable as the Pro version is, but it can really fit into your requirements. And then the last edition is Metasploit Framework. This is the command line edition with all the manual tasks, such as manual exploitation, third-party import, and so on and so forth. And because the framework is the base for all the editions, this is the one that makes more sense for the developers and the security researchers. Now, I also want to clarify something important, that throughout this course, I will be using the Metasploit Framework edition. So except for some of the experimental purposes, I'm not going to be using the other editions. But I will show you the installation and basic usage of them so that you remain familiar. So unless I particularly specify Metasploit, you should take it to mean the Metasploit Framework from now on. And sometimes I'll say MSF, which is short for Metasploit Framework. Now, this illustration can help you to understand the differences between the editions. And of course, Metasploit Pro has some additional features. So it is indeed obvious to me, and certainly I hope to you, that Metasploit Pro is addressed more by security professionals and the security consulting practices. Now, unlike the others, the Pro version has an increased execution and browsing functionality. So besides what open source framework offers, Metasploit Pro goes above and beyond by delivering a full graphical user interface, automated exploitation capabilities, and complete user action audit logs, as well as customizable reporting. The Pro features an advanced penetration testing workflow that includes antivirus evasion, customized reporting, social engineering capabilities, web application support, VPN pivoting, and multi-user capabilities. Metasploit Pro can also be installed on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X machines, and you can certainly run it on almost any web browser. Or you can continue to use the command line interface, which they call Pro Console. Metasploit Pro is fully supported by Rapid7's security and support specialists, in addition to the large and, well, it's been growing, the Metasploit community. So to use Metasploit Pro, you will need to purchase it from Rapid7 and install it on your system. However, they have cleverly developed a trial version, so you can go ahead and download it and examine what the Pro version offers in detail. The Metasploit community is a lighter version of the Metasploit Pro. Now, like the Pro edition, you will have a graphical user interface over the web browser, and that will incredibly help you to simplify your efforts, such as network discovery and vulnerability verification for specific exploits. You can increase the effectiveness of your vulnerability scanners, such as Nessus, Nexpose, and so forth, by using them with the community version. The Metasploit community offers some great features. Map your network. It supports you to scan and make host identification. provide a concurrent export-import capability that helps you to work with tools such as Nessus, Nmap, and others. In addition, Nexpose scans can be initiated from within the Metasploit Community Edition, and a bunch of other wonderful features you're going to see. So the only thing you should be watching here is enumeration and safe exploitation. Oh, and another thing that I forgot to say. I think it's the best part. It's free. Still. So let's have a look at the interface. Now, although there is a whole section about community, I only want to show you the interface for now. If you don't want to install it by yourself, you don't have to do it now. It's in its own section. So have a look at the interface. And it displays over the web browser. So I'm just going to open my browser. I happen to have it bookmarked here. And this is a login screen for the Community Edition. Going to enter my login info. And click Sign In. And this is the main view. Now I'm going to zoom in and hide this panel to get a better view. Yeah, that's a little better. So as you can see, the projects reside here. You can list or create a new project from this menu. And over here on the upper right-hand corner, you will see the global settings and community user account information. All right, so now let's view the details of Pen Test 1. So this is the overview, the summary of the project. However, on the above menu, you can also see some special items to work with Metasploit Community. For example, you can manage hosts, your sessions, and your credentials. Some menu items like web apps are only in the Pro version. So that means you're going to see this annoying page. Metasploit also offers various types of user interfaces, and each one has its own advantages. The GUI interface. With the graphical user interface, some people say GUI. I tend to prefer GUI. Almost everything might be done by clicking a button. This interface is user-friendly, and that helps to provide a cleaner scanning and exploiting environment. I've showed you that while talking about the Pro and the Community Editions. You might like it a whole lot better because it just, is a clean way to exploit a target. Now, this is the console interface. The way I see it, most of the penetration testers and security researchers use this interface. It's also the most popular one. Its power cannot be underestimated. This interface provides an all-in-one approach to basically all the options offered by Metasploit. It's also considered one of the most stable interfaces. Now, throughout the range of this course, I'm going to be using this console interface for the most part. Now, once you get used to the environment and the commands, you're going to consider yourself a console ninja. And the next one is the command line interface. Metasploit had an interface named MSF CLI, but nowadays it doesn't really exist. You can use MSF Console's X parameter to accomplish the exact same thing now. It supports almost every feature that Metasploit framework has, such as the launching of exploits to activities, payload generation, and so forth. However, I think it's hard to memorize every command each time. So I tend not to use it too much, although somehow I'll use it a couple of times. You'll see when we get there. So for those of you who want to benefit from MSF, but you really feel you need a GUI, hold on. The next one is for you. Armitage. 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 You say Armitage. Anyway, Armitage by Raphael Mudge. It's a cool hacker-style GUI interface. It provides a lot of the features such as easy vulnerability management, Nmap scans, exploit recommendations. It uses Cortana scripting language for automation. Now, to be honest, I don't really use this feature, and so I will give you some extra thoughts about Armitage in the next slide. Also, there's a full section that covers how to use it efficiently, so stay tuned. I first want to show you the equivalent of the old MSF CLI interface. Because it doesn't exist now, MSF Console's X parameter does the exact task for you. So open your terminal. MSF Console H will display a basic help menu. Now here the parameter and its description is visible. But now I'm going to use it as type MSF Console X. Then, between double quotes, write your Metasploit commands. So I'm going to use the vsftpd exploit again. And yeah, there's no tab completion here. So that's why I was saying earlier, it might be a little more difficult to remember the command each time. So anyway, hit enter, and it'll start the Metasploit at the very first moment. Then it will use the exploit and set its variables. A session is open in the background, so I will interact with that session by sessions I1. Now, because this is not a Meterpreter shell, you can directly write Linux commands to the screen. Uname A to check the machine's full name. Ifconfig, and this is what you saw earlier in Metasploitable 2. Now, due to some licensing issues, Offensive Security doesn't ship Metasploit Community and the Trial Pro versions in Kali Linux. That's why I want to provide you with another free option, which is called Armitage. Now, it's not an addition of the Metasploit framework. It's an interface that will help you manage your penetration tests. It has a very good Java-based graphical user interface. And as I said before, hey, it's developed by Raphael Mudge. So the goal here is to help security professionals better understand hacking and help them realize the power of Metasploit. So now let's have a look at how to get into this tool. You don't need to install Armitage into Kali. It already comes pre-installed. So naturally, you can install Armitage to some other Linux distros, but for Windows, it's not valid. So you can't work with Armitage on Windows systems. Now, you may find a way to use it on Windows, but it probably won't be worth the effort. Anyway, open your terminal and type Armitage. And it asks for connecting to the database server, so click Connect. Then it'll ask to start Metasploit RPC server to remotely interact with Metasploit, so click Yes. And at first glance, this is what it looks like. Now, you see that on the left pane, the modules are there. And on the right pane, there is nothing, but if you have your hosts, it will be listed. And below is for the console and the module-specific tabs. So you can manage Armitage from the above menu. And here inside the Armitage menu item, you can set global settings for Armitage and create listeners, change the view of the right pane. The console item provides you with a place to manage your credentials, your jobs, downloaded files, and all that. And you'll see that they come up as tabs below. Under the host item, there are options for managing hosts on your penetration test. Armitage allows you to add host and make an Nmap scan on them at any time during a pen test. Another great feature of Armitage is here under the Attacks menu. It will suggest exploits for your target host after a rather extensive enumeration. So if you want to, you can try every suitable exploit onto the target host. On the Workspace menu, you can create and change between your workspaces. So that is Armitage in general. We're going to get into much greater detail in an entire section of its own just a little bit later. So now you have the basic information about the Metasploit framework and its structure. So why don't we go ahead and let's get started with the basics of MSF console. And I guess you could consider it the most popular interface. But before I show you a demo, I want to tell you a little bit more about it. It is just a simple command line interface for the Metasploit framework. However, don't let its simplicity fool you. It's an easy and flexible way to interact with the framework. It's the most stable and powerful interface to access most of the features within MSF. Now, at first, the syntax might be a bit confusing, but it's not going to take you much time to appreciate the power of this interface. Now, you will use MSF console to rule the Metasploit framework throughout the rest of this course. As I mentioned to you earlier, some of the Metasploit editions offer GUI and web-based interfaces. However, I think from a learning perspective, I'm always going to recommend mastering the command line console of the Metasploit framework. And among my favorite things is the Linux command style tabbing, as well as the command completion. That's my friend, and I'm sure it'll become your friend too. So go ahead and open your terminal and simply type in MSF console H to display the basic help for the console. So this is basic help menu for MSF console. Now, certainly you're familiar with the Q and the X parameter from some of the previous videos. For the other ones, I'm going to let you go ahead and discover them by yourself, because you're not going to really need them throughout the rest of this course. So, to interact with the console, just type MSF console. So I add the Q parameter to start the Metasploit in a quiet way. And you'll get the point after a few minutes. Watch. So type it and hit enter. Now, if this is the first time you start it up, you may need to wait a little longer, but not too much. And look at that. That's all there is. MSF console is all that. So to find your way and take advantage of using Metasploit, MSF console provides some commands, and you can type help to view the commands. So they're categorized by their usage purpose. Here are some of the core commands. The core commands work all the time. They are not specific to a particular module or something else. And then the module commands, these ones are related to the modules such as exploit, payloads, and those are the ones that we've used in previous videos. Job commands help you manage handlers, your incoming connections. Resource commands are very useful when you want to automate your work. Now, because Metasploit was developed with Ruby, it also provides you a Ruby shell to interact with. And then all the developer commands help you to specialize your Metasploit experience. Now, Metasploit has the ability to use a database, such as MySQL, PostgreSQL. So with database commands, you're going to manage the database operations. For example, you can import a scan result into Metasploit, or you can export the results. And there's so many more options. Now, while you are conducting a penetration test, you'll probably get some credentials. So that's usernames, passwords, hashes, etc. With creds, you can view, add, or delete these credentials. And of course, you can if you use Metasploit. And now I want to dive into MSF console commands in the next section, so come with me. So MSF has such a wide variety of different commands, and they all have well-defined name conventions that will help you to rule the framework. So let's have a look. Core commands. These are the basic commands of Metasploit. You can use them to make general purpose as well as framework level tasks. Module commands. They're there to help you move between modules and to pass values to the variables. You can view and use a module with these commands. Job commands are basically used for interacting with your sessions to view the status of the jobs that you've started. Resource script commands allow you to record and to run your own scripts to automate your routines. Developer commands allow you to edit the files and interact with Ruby. Database commands are, like we were talking about before, importing and exporting as well as the connection to a database. With these commands, that's where you're going to save your findings. And the credential commands are used when you activate database, and they help you to store and get credentials found while you're doing your penetration testing. So I chose some sets so that you get the basic idea about how to use them. So why don't we go ahead and jump into Kali to see them in action. Go ahead and open your terminal and just write MSF console. So this time, you see that I don't put the Q as a parameter because, well, I don't want to view that banner. Banners are these funny things here. You can change them every time by typing the banner command. But believe me, that's not the actual fun part. You're going to find the real fun in later modules, but I want to make sure that you're well-versed in the basics. So I'll choose to divide the MSF console commands into groups to show you in a more meaningful way and make it clear. So, okay, let's start. Color command will provide a colorful output if you enable it. Now, by default, it is enabled, and you may disable it for whatever reason you like. I'm going to enable it by putting in color true. Now, to view the MSF version, just type the version command. All right, so this is my installation version when I was recording the course. And then beside MSF console commands, the interface allows you to execute Linux system commands. Now, I don't know if it's the same in Windows, but on Linux, you have this flexibility. I can change my directory, view it, or I can check my IP address. But anyway, I think you get the point. So you still have questions about the commands? All right, so type this into the console, and it will help you. Or just put help, and you'll see the same output. Now let's say this is not enough, and you want some specific info about a particular command. Type help, and then the command name. So for example, help workspace, or maybe help help. There's only so much it can do. Okay, so type help search, and then let's have a look at the search command help output. So this command will really be helpful to find a module, and you're going to use it many times. It's okay, you just stick in a search term, and you'll see the results. And as you can see from the help screen, you can also be more specific while you're searching. So let's type in search name Java. Now, that, as you see, will bring up many Java-related modules to the screen. Let's search name Java, rank excellent, date 2011. Okay, so only 3 results. So obviously you can narrow the result by being more specific. Okay, so the next thing is grepping. You can grep the output of this command like this. Metasploit also records your history like bash, so it has a history file. And with the history command, you can view what you have entered in the MSF console, just like that. Here you can see some of my previous commands. But you can also save all the output, not only to history. So look at the spool command. We'll type spool and then the output file name, and then it will save everything. Spool desktop msf.log. So now whatever you see in MSF console will be saved to that file. So let's cat this file. And there it is, it saves everything. Here you might want to type spool stop, but I'm not going to do that now. In a penetration test, you may also configure the Metasploit according to your needs. And you are allowed to save your configuration by simply typing the save command, and then your configuration will be saved to that file. Now here, because I'm not making any change to the default settings, you won't see anything. If you finish your work with Metasploit, you can then quit by using quit or the exit command. You can close up Metasploit and exit just like that. So now open your terminal and start the MSF console. The first command of this part is show. Now when you work with a module, it helps you to display the variables and properties of that module. So the help screen is for showing us that. Type the show command, and then the name of the object. So let's have a look at NOP generators by typing show NOPs. And as you see, the NOP generators list appears. So there's no plugin for this phase. And here are the encoders. And also the exploits. But it might take a little while to list all the exploits if you try to list them. And then here are all the exploits in Metasploit. Now, when you need to use an exploit, you can search these exploits. For example, if you want to exploit a Java RMI server code execution, you can search for terms like RMI, RMI registry. So yeah, let's perform a search just like that. Search RMI registry. And you see it brings me the appropriate exploit. So I want to make an important point here. When you are conducting a pen test, you should perform an extensive enumeration on the target to choose the right exploit. That's how you know what to search for. Although Metasploit has many exploits, it doesn't mean that you can use every single one in every circumstance. First, you'll need to find the vulnerability, and then if Metasploit has a suitable exploit, you can use that. Otherwise, you may have a headache if you randomly run exploits, and it's a waste of time. Okay, so back to the RMI registry exploit. So now you have the name of the exploit. And if you recall from the previous videos, how do you use this exploit? Type use and then the name of the exploit. Now you can work with that exploit. If you want to be sure about the exploit, or if you want to configure the details, you can use the info command. to get detailed information about what the exploit's going to do. And in this case, this is an exploit, but for sure it can be any other Metasploit module. So read the description, examine the variables, or follow the reference link to get additional information about that particular exploit. Show the options to view the variables, and these are the basic variables. And yes, you can set some advanced variables to have more control over the exploit code. How do you do that? Show advanced. So, here are the other variables of the exploit to make some of the advanced configurations. Some exploits only work with a specific operating system or software versions, whatever. Now, to send the target the right exploit code, you've got to know the version of what you're trying to exploit. Makes sense, right? I'll assume here that you have made enumeration and you know your target well. So that's what you tell Metasploit. Here you specify the available targets by the show targets command. As I hope you see on the screen, there's only 5 types of targets. So this means that this exploit can't be utilized on environments other than these particular 5. For the most part. In a production environment, your exploit may fail due to IPS, IDS, or firewall rules. So I think it's good practice to evade these security measures. For each exploit, there are different evasion techniques in Metasploit. So let's use the show evasion command to display the available techniques. And if you want, you can choose these. And these are the payloads that I listed by the show payloads command. Now, like evasion, for each exploit, there are different payloads. So this means you can't use a Linux payload for a Windows system. And for this exploit, there are these available payloads. Now I'll show you these variables again, and let's set them. You may remember from some of the previous videos how to set a variable, so we'll do that now. Use the set command, just like that. That's why I like the Linux console. Setting the value of variable means you can get the value of the same variable by simply typing get as the command and then the variable name. This is the Metasploitable2 IP address in my lab environment. Now you can also unset a variable value by using the unset command. And I just unset our host value as you see here. So you may come across a situation that you need to use the same value in every exploit. So you can just set the variable to the same value in each exploit again. If you use setg command, you can globally set a variable value. And by using the getg command, you can get the global value of a variable. And then simply you can unset a global variable by using the unsetg command. Now, after setting all the variables, you can get the exploit to execute by either using the run or the exploit commands. It actually doesn't matter. So these messages here show what's going on in the background. And you will also be informed by Metasploit if a session is open. So now I have the session, and by typing the sessions command, I will list my available sessions. And as expected, I have only this one. Now to interact with that session, type sessions as your command with the I parameter, and then an index of the session appears. In my case, it's 3. Okay, so now I'm in the Meterpreter shell. Later, you're going to have your deep dive into Meterpreter, I promise. But for now, I'm going to only show you that I have exploited the Metasploitable 2. Then let's type in background to turn back to the MSF console again. Now, when you're finished with an exploit, you can pick another one directly by using the use command like this, or you can use the back and then utilize the new one by the use command. That's pretty much how I work. Then show the exploit options. Now for this exploit, I will define a payload by setting the payload variable, set payload Java, Meterpreter reverse TCP. So I don't set the rhost variable, but in the previous video, I defined it as a global variable. And also there are some new variables under this payload section, lhost and lport, because I chose a reverse TCP connection, which means that after a successful exploitation, the target will connect back to me. So lhost in this context is the IP address of Kali, and lport is the port that is ready to connect to Kali. Its default value is 4444, and I don't want to change that. I will only set the lhost to 10.10.2.11, then set HTTP password to Tomcat, set HTTP username to Tomcat. Now, it isn't necessary, but I can set the target to 0. I forgot the R port. So let's set the R port to 8180. Okay, so let me check it one more time. Okay, yeah, everything looks good. Now, exploit. See, it doesn't take too much time. And I have the Meterpreter session on Metasploitable 2. But this time, let's have a look at the user Tomcat55. It is not the root user. So this means actually you don't have a high privileged shell. So I'm going to send this session to the background by using the Meterpreter bg command. So this is my sessions list in the background. Okay, so I want to show you a couple more commands. Push M and pop M. Push M will push the current module to stack. Now I will push this exploit to stack. Then I can pick another one, RMI registry exploit, and I'll run it and I get another session. So as you can see here, I am working with RMI registry exploit. With the pop M, I'll pop the last module from the stack, and it's the Tomcat Manager exploit as you see here on your screen. So I'll advise you to do this because when you're doing some really quick exploitation, those last two commands come in super handy. All right, so I want to get something off my chest. I need to share with you. As a penetration tester, it's really important to be organized while testing. Now, you're probably going to find yourself in an information pool, and I don't want you to drown. It contains tons of details like credentials, vulnerable services, targets, scan reports, and the list goes on and on. So it is absolutely essential to keep track of what you've done on the network. So this is why MSF has an option to cover with extensive support multiple database systems. So configuring a database to work with MSF will be a real time saver for you. MSF supports MySQL and PostgreSQL. You can use both. However, PostgreSQL is the default one, which has built-in support within MSF. And by using this feature, you can easily access scan information, export and import results, use the identified information later on in modules. Then you will also be able to keep your findings clean and well organized. So go ahead and open your terminal again. Metasploit can use databases to store information. So you have the option to start without a database, but please, for a better penetration testing experience, I do not recommend this. So before starting the MSF console using a database, you need to run a sequence of commands. The default installation of Metasploit framework on Kali uses PostgreSQL. So you should first start PostgreSQL from the Linux terminal by typing in systemctl start postgresql.service. And now the next thing is creating and initializing the Metasploit database in PostgreSQL. For this, you can use the msfdb command, and here's the help screen for it. So let's check the database status by typing in msfdb status, and what comes up is PostgreSQL is running, and msfdb finds a database connection file in the default directory. So if you start msfdb, it will use the information in this file for connecting to PostgreSQL. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that database, and let's create it from the beginning. msfdb delete for deletion. Okay, so now initialization with msfdb init. Then start the msfdb with msfdb start. Now, actually, when you run msfdb, it will automatically start PostgreSQL. Therefore, you can only use msfdb, but this is just my habit. So I'll first run PostgreSQL, then msfdb. And I'm going to run it in quiet mode. Okay, MSF console open. Now, in order to do the database operations, MSF console has its own database commands. So let's type in help database to get a look at these commands. And here are some of them. And you can see the names are very clear. Check database status with db status. And Metasploit connected to default MSF3. So you can change this database. You can even create your own and connect to that. And that is going to be our next goal. And now I want to introduce you to the workspace concept in Metasploit. It's more like working under a project area, I think. So simply type workspace to see the available workspaces. Now here I have only the default one. The workspace command has a help screen. So you can add, delete, and create workspaces with abandon, according to whatever your requirements are. And the V command will list the workspaces in a verbose mode. And I will add a couple of workspaces by using A as my parameter. And here are the workspaces that I have added. Now, automatically, the last one is chosen, as you see here. Now, you can also delete a workspace by using the D parameter. And let's say you want to change your workspace anytime. Just write its name after the workspace command. Oh, I'm already using Pentest 4. Alrighty then. Let's connect Metasploit to our own database. So it is quite easy and I think natural if you want to use another DBMS such as MySQL or another database in PostgreSQL. So I'm going to change the current database to another one in PostgreSQL. But before I do that, I need to create a database. So these are my workspaces, but I'm not going to need them now. So I'm going to disconnect from the MSF3 database. Then exit from Metasploit. Now, I think it's good practice to stop PostgreSQL for a while, then start it again. But this is just one of my old habits that I pass on to you. Okay, so now I'm going to get the full name of the PostgreSQL user by these commands. Name is Postgres, type SU, Postgres, to get into PostgreSQL user shell. Now here you're not going to need a password because the default installation there is no password. Now the logic is the same if there is a password, you will need to type it. All right then. List databases with PSQL L, and here are the databases. So now I'm going to create a user first by using the create user command. Create user, user for MSF P. I'm going to enter my very strong password 2 times. And now let's create a database by create DB. That's the command that is owned by the user for MSF that we just created. So create DB, DB for MSF, owner equals user for MSF. All right, so let's list the databases. And sure enough, here I have the database. So I am now finished with Postgres shell, and I'm going to exit. And I'll open MSF console in quiet mode again. It's finally open. And let's just quickly check the DB status. So as you can see here, it connects to the default database. So now I'm going to disconnect from that database, and that's successful. Now I'm going to connect to my new database, DB for MSF. DB connect user for MSF 1234 at localhost:5432 /db4msf 1234 is my strong password, as you can see. All right, so now let's check the status of the database. Okay, good. So here you see that I have connected the new one. And you can now work within the workspaces. Add, delete, choose. It's all on you now. So I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes you're going to hear words like active exploit or passive exploit, right? Basically, exploits in the Metasploit framework are divided into 2 categories, active or passive. So, what does that mean to you? Active exploits will exploit a specific host, run until completion, and then exit. For example, brute force modules will exit immediately when a shell opens, and execution of the module stops if an error occurs. Oh, and by the way, you can force an active exploit to work in the background by entering J into the exploit command. And of course, on the other hand, passive exploits wait for incoming hosts and then exploit them as they connect. These exploits almost always focus on clients, such as web browsers, FTP clients, and all those. And they'll report shells as they open. Now you can list open shells by entering I with the sessions command. Also, by adding I with a sessions command, you'll be able to interact with the intended shell. Metasploit framework ranks the exploits to help you find the appropriate exploit. And I'll show you all the ranks and their meanings. Excellent. The exploit will never crash the service. This is the case for SQL injection, CMD execution, RFI, LFI, etc. There's no typical memory corruption exploits should be given this ranking unless there are some extraordinary circumstances. Great. The exploit has a default target and either auto-detects the appropriate target or uses an application-specific return address after a version check. Good. Exploit has a default target, and it is the common case for this type of software. Normal. The exploit is otherwise reliable, but depends on a specific version and can't or doesn't reliably auto-detect. Average. The exploit is generally unreliable or difficult to exploit. Low. The exploit is nearly impossible to exploit, or I'd say under a 50% success rate for common platforms. Manual. The exploit is unstable or difficult to exploit and is basically a DOS. So this ranking is also used when the module has no use unless specifically configured by the user.